All right, we're going to talk about Unit 3. Unit 3 is about how to get into business. So we have things we're going to talk about, like types of ownership, if we want to be an LLC, sole proprietorship, things like that. We're also going to talk about buying a business, franchising, or starting from scratch, which is what we've probably been thinking about up until this point as we go through our ideas and start verifying if there's an opportunity there. But now is the time to maybe branch out and see, hey, maybe I could buy something already existing. Maybe I could find a franchise that fits these requirements that interest me, that would make more sense on how I want to get into business. And then we'll also want to talk about the breakdown of types of ownership. So that's where we're headed today. I'm trying to sneak this recording in before we open here at my business. So we'll try to make it concise in these 51 slides we have to go through. So first thing to think about is, what type of, I'm so sorry that my computer is a monster. Okay, here we go. What type of business we want to, what type of ownership do we want to have, right? I think LLC is probably the one most entrepreneurs think about, but there's really no best form of ownership. Just depends on your situation. So we'll talk about the types of things you'll want to consider before you make that decision and how you kind of figure that out, what you go do once you figure it out, that type of thing. So the next slide looks at the factors affecting the choice. Some things to think about: tax considerations. That's one of the main things. The tax considerations and the liability exposure are the two main reasons, I think, especially in a small business, that you choose one type of business versus the other. And then thinking ahead as you grow and things like that might affect the decision in addition to those two things. So tax considerations, liability exposure, how you're going to want to fund can make a difference. How much control you want over your business can make a difference. Your just managerial ability, your business goals, succession plans, cost of formation, all those can factor into ways that you decide on your form of ownership. So sole proprietorship, general partnership, limited partnership, corporation, S Corp, and then the LLC are your major forms of ownership. LLC is the newest. Sole proprietorships far and away make up the largest portion of businesses. C Corps, S Corps, LLCs, and then the partnerships are the tiniest slivers on there. Let's see what else we got. Now we're looking on, so the other one was just the percentage of businesses. Now we're looking based on the percentage of sales. So larger businesses, you'll take away from this pie chart, tend to be the C Corps, and we'll find out why, right? Sole proprietorships, although they make up the far and away the largest percentage, over 70% of businesses, they bring in, a tiny sliver of the sales overall. And so, there's a reason why smaller businesses tend to be sole proprietorships. Larger businesses tend to be C or S Corp in terms of sales. LLCs come in next, and the partnerships, again, are pretty small slivers. You'll see that limited partnership branch out just a little bit in the percentage of businesses, because those are generally like medical or higher income type of businesses that set up that way. So something to think about. Number of businesses doing it doesn't necessarily equate to percentage of sales, and we'll see why those break out that way. Percentage of net income, fairly similar again in terms of breakout. Sole proprietorships come out a little bit bigger. And then the limited partnerships, like we talked about, spread out a little bit more too. Sole proprietorships. So why are so many businesses, over 70% of businesses, set up as sole proprietorships? They're simple. They're inexpensive. You profit incentive. You get the money, right? You run in that business and it's yours, and you're not sharing it with a partner, and you're not You don't have stockholders, things like that. So pretty straightforward. Total decision-making authority, if that's what a lot of people get into entrepreneurship for that reason. They want to be in charge. So sole proprietorship is great in terms of what kind of control you have over the business. No special legal restrictions, easy to discontinue. You just stop doing business. So there are lots of, if your business is pretty small, if it's just you, if there's not, some tax or liability things that you'll have to be concerned about depending on the industry. If I'm just gonna make some crafts for craft shows, there's no reason for me to become a S corp or C corp. This is totally fine for that. Why would I move up maybe to a different level, maybe move on from the sole proprietorship? Unlimited personal liability. So this is what generally moves the ticker to the next thing. So if something were to happen and you needed to end your business, and you owed money still, maybe you had rented a place, maybe you bought a bunch of stuff, whatever, they also can collect on your personal assets. So your debts are not just the debts of the business, they're your personal debts as well. So that's something that people worry about, especially if you're in a type of industry where things tend to be litigious. People tend to sue over things, stuff like that. Then you would have to think about that as well. Limited skills and capabilities. If you are thinking that you might need to bring on a partner or additional owners, then the sole proprietorship setup wouldn't work for you. Limited access to capital, which same type of thing. So as far as being limited in skills and capabilities, you have the same situation with capital. So if I think I'm going to need to bring on a partner or an investor of some sort, then sole proprietorship doesn't work there. Lack of continuity in the business. If you plan to pass this on to your children, you want the business to outlive you, you're not just the business, then, sole proprietorship probably isn't the right choice for you as well. So things to think about there. It doesn't mention taxes here. Taxes are easy in a sole proprietorship because they just pass through to your personal taxes. There's no double taxation, which you run into when you start getting into the corporations, where it taxes you on the business's income, as well as then when you pay it to yourself, your personal income. Sole proprietorship, it just passes through. There's only taxation on, whatever you make shows up as what you make personally. So that's the advantage of a sole proprietorship as well. Partnership, this is when there's a couple of people, 2 or more people that own the business, right? A lot of people get into this because they either, like we mentioned, some of the drawbacks of sole proprietorship, you might need somebody else with different skills and capabilities. So you bring on a partner. You might need more access to capital. So you bring on a partner who brings money into the situation. If you listened to the podcast that talked about partnership in the dating ring on the second season, I don't think very many people listened to that second season, but they had a partnership, and there was actually 3 of them initially. I think 1 left later on, but other things make partnerships difficult. But you always create a partnership agreement. When Mr. Dahl teaches this class, he's also a lawyer and a judge. He would always say he doesn't set up partnerships. There's too much that can go wrong. It's too hard to, there's always something that goes wrong. So partnership agreement can help hopefully offset that, right? Get in writing what you're going to do, who does what, who owns what, who makes decisions, how you're going to split that up. If you, again, listen to the dating ring, they sit down at one point, there's 3 of them, and they discuss how ownership is going to be divided. And, it's a hard conversation. I don't blame them for not wanting to do it until, maybe later on into the relationship, or not at all. You know, like, well, we're friends, or we respect each other. We can figure it out as we go. Horrible idea. Get it in writing. Who decides on what? Who has the final say? Who runs the business? Who handles the money? How the money. And this can be set up in any way. We'll talk about this in LLC as well, because the agreement is kind of similar. But just make sure you have that. Handshake agreement with your best friend from college is probably your worst idea ever. So make sure there's an agreement that's very specific, that's maybe uncomfortable. And if it's not uncomfortable to come up with, you probably didn't get specific enough. Let's see what we got next. This talks about the things to make sure you have in it, the ownership, how are you going to share the profits and losses? I mean, you can do this however you want. Like, just because if there's two of you, it doesn't have to be 50-50. And the split up of the profits and losses doesn't have to be the same either. You could each in management have a 50-50 say, but then split up the profits and losses differently. Things to think about. Again, they're easy to establish, just like a sole proprietorship. You can bring people on that maybe have capital, skills, things like that, that are going to be helpful, and maybe attract some limited partners. We'll talk about those in the next slide. General partners are what we generally think about, right? I'm going to get into business with my best friend, and we're going to run it together and come in every day and work and whatever. You both take an active role in managing the business. One of the things to think about in general partnership is that, just like a sole proprietorship, one of the drawbacks there is that unlimited liability. So this is why Mr. Dahl said he doesn't set up partnerships, because if you're in business with your best friend and he's married, and he doesn't have a ton of money, and you're, maybe single and have a big savings, and he enters into some agreement with a supplier that you wouldn't agree on, but, he did it, and now you're liable for, that money on that contract personally, even though he signed the agreement. So you are not only have unlimited liability like you did in the sole proprietorship, but now you have unlimited liability for any of the partnership's debts, and it doesn't matter who signed that agreement. So, just can make it a little bit more tricky, and there's no way to, as general partners, to do anything differently. Every partnership needs to have at least one general partner. Obviously, somebody needs to manage the business, but limited partners so that was a problem, right? Nobody wanted to get into a partnership and then everybody's responsible for everybody else's stupid choices. So limited partners, they cannot participate in the day-to-day management of the company. It's more like an investment situation. So they have limited liability for the partnership's debt, but they can invest essentially into the partnership. So it gives you some options, capital ways to get into that. There's two descriptions of those partners as well, silent and dormant. I'm not worried about you knowing that. Should have just deleted that one out. Advantages, easy to establish. I think we talked about those. Larger pool of capital. You maybe get some limited partners. Flexible. You don't have double taxation in that one, just like sole proprietorship. Disadvantages are similar again. One partner at least has unlimited liability. Difficulty in dissolving the partnership. So if somebody wants to get out of it, like, how do you do it? Do you buy them out? Who gets that? How does that work? Personality and authority conflicts. It's obviously something to think about. So things to think about there. Limited liability partnerships are another option. The income's passed through still, like a sole proprietorship, but you have the limited liability for the debts of the partnership. These are generally used for, there's some more requirements for these as well. They're generally used for like medical, like specific professions. So something to look into if you're thinking of partnership and you want to really narrow it down. See the options there for sure. Corporation. So this is a separate legal entity from its owners. So this is where we start separating, the income and the ongoing entity into something of its own, right? It can be publicly held. I was just online trying to look for a stock to, an aerospace engineering stock to put some money in. And so I'm looking at publicly held companies, just that are trading on the stock exchange, things like that, or closely held corporations. So that's more what we're thinking of, like Coke or Coleman, things like that aren't on the stock exchange, but are large corporations that are held by either family members or just a small group of relatives, friends, that still own it and run it. But it is a separate legal organization. So, if they go away, if, all the Cokes are not around anymore, it doesn't mean Coke Industries goes away, right? Because it's a separate legal entity. It's more complicated, right? So you now have annual meetings, you have to elect officers and directors, you have to keep minutes from a meeting. There's a lot of requirements. You have to file reports, you have to pay fees. There are a lot of rules when you get into this larger corporation setup. So, a board now makes all the major decisions. Officers have to, sign documents in the corporation's name. Corporate and personal assets are separate. There's two types of the larger corporation, C Corp. This one, I'll do S Corp. So there's no different from any corporation from a legal perspective, right? But the S Corp is taxed like a partnership. So I feel like this is like the next level, right? If I went from sole proprietorship to partnership, and then maybe I looked at like an LLC or S Corp, right? So this one, it's still the different legal entity, but it's taxed like a corporate or like a partnership. So you pass all the profits and losses through to the individual shareholders. It's kind of a mixture of the C Corp and the partnership or the sole proprietorship. There are still more of those requirements like we talked about, with having a board and filing annual reports and, having open meetings and things like that. So you really have to think about if that makes enough sense for you to get into this situation. C Corp is what we look at for most big corporations, right? This is a traditional form of our corporation. You're going to pay taxes at the corporate rate, and then the stockholders also pay taxes on their dividends at their individual tax rate. So this is where we get into that double taxation. You've gotten rid of all of the unlimited liability personally. So, that's definitely an advantage. You've gotten in this corporation, you're a legal entity, so you're moving on, even if you don't exist anymore. LLC, so those are pretty complex, right? I'm not sure if I want to be bound by all of this more, boards and all this stuff. So this is, I think, why an LLC came into existence. It's a limited liability company, and it's similar to an S Corp, but it's not subject to the same restrictions. And there are more restrictions on those as well. So number of investors, what types of stock you can have, whether it's preferred or general, things like that. So that wasn't completely all-encompassing of how those corporations come to be. So if you're interested in those, you'll want to research and get into more details. The LLC has an Articles of Organization and an operating agreement. So the Articles of Organization establishes, method of management, name, address, things like that. Operating agreement tells how it's going to conduct business. So this is where you get more into kind of like the partnership agreement, where you're going to split things up, who runs it, how does it pass, how do the profits and losses pass through, things like that. When you're creating these, there is some cost, sole proprietorship. I think you maybe have to register with the state or something like that, and maybe it costs you $20 or something. It's not significant. Setting up an LLC or any of these types of corporations, there is a cost to it. I think when we set up our LLC, it was probably around $1,000. Seeing a lawyer, you can get on websites and things like that, but If it gets set up incorrectly, if you're not talking to somebody specifically about what you're doing so they can tell you, yes, this is what you should do, get the actual legal advice, then you can get into situations. That was one other thing. The two things that stuck with me, and I haven't heard his conversation about setting up businesses for a long time, but the second thing that Mr. Dahl said, other than he doesn't do partnerships, is that he doesn't if you set it up online, he doesn't help you fix it. So, I mean, just because once you get into something, it's really hard to switch. So if you're like, hey, I'm going to give like an S Corp a try, and if it's not right, then I'll just go back to sole proprietorship. It's better to move up the ladder than try to move back down. So if you're like, I'm not sure, I'm just going to get started as sole proprietorship, and then when I figure it out, that would be a better choice. And the best choice is to see a lawyer and figure out what you should do. But it's much better to start sole proprietorship, and then if you find that maybe you're going to add a partner, then you start deciding a partnership or an LLC or something like that, and move up as it becomes necessary. Again, you do have to weigh all the factors of taxation and unlimited liability, things like that. If you're in an industry where it makes sense to limit your liability and go straight for an LLC, that could certainly be the right thing to do as well. But there's more cost and more complication as you move up. So things to think about. Get the best form of ownership. There isn't one best form of ownership. I think a lot of people think, well, I'll just be an LLC like everybody else. But that isn't necessary for everyone. And so, making sure that you understand the industry and the type of business you're in and your goals and all those things make the decision easier. Moving on to the next topic, maybe we're going to buy a business, right? You'll always have to decide how you want to set up your structure. That doesn't change if you're going to start from scratch, you're going to buy, you're going to build, you're going to franchise. So this will be a decision that every business maker will have to decide on. But you'll also have to decide, hey, am I going to start this from scratch, or is there something out there that maybe I could just get in on that's already being built? So thinking about this, is the right type of business for sale in the market you want to operate? Do you have experience in this industry, this business? What's the company's potential for success? What changes would you make? How extensive? Would that make it worthwhile? We looked at buying a business earlier on when we were more adventurous, I guess. We looked at buying a supply business for the spa. Like, we make many of our spa products, so we thought, well, let's buy. There was in Kansas, not locally, but in another town in Kansas, a supply business that I've been buying some things from, and they came up for sale. And so we went down and kind of looked and met and got their information to see if it would be maybe something we'd be interested in doing, becoming an online supplier for making the products. So, it's interesting. It's can be very complicated, and you'll have to get an accountant and a lawyer involved, I would think, for sure, just to feel comfortable that you're figuring everything out. What price and payment method are reasonable? Is the seller willing to finance? Will the company generate cash to pay for itself and give you a rate of return? Should you just start a business and build it from the ground up rather than buying an existing one? There's a lot of questions that go into it. So once we went and looked and got the information and really thought about, inventory wise, essentially we were buying the inventory and maybe some, method and maybe a little name recognition. But we were going to have to move it. We weren't going to run it from that location, I don't think, either. We hadn't even really gotten that far into it. And the inventory, there's shelf life on that type of inventory, and they had a lot of excess inventory that probably we would never move at as profit even. So then it came down to, well, does it make sense to buy all this and try to move it for them, or should we just, if we want to do this, stock it ourselves and start it where we want it and all that stuff. So it didn't end up being something we went forward with, but it was interesting to look into and see what our options were. Types of business buyers. I think this is interesting to think about in terms of even types of business owners, right? What kind of business entrepreneur do I want to be? So Main Street buyers, this is something that you're just going to run on your own. So I used to have a speaker come in that owned Il Primo Espresso here in Wichita, a little coffee shop, right? She bought it because it would be easy to manage on her own. She could run it alone with a small group of employees. She didn't plan on adding locations or anything like that. Revenue up to $1 million, not a lot of risk. You're going to look at like the current and past earnings, see if the seller can help you assist with the transition, which she did. She's still around too. The Jolanda that used to own it has since moved on and sold it to someone else who is probably more looking to move out of that Main Street buyer section and maybe see if they can replicate in, I know there's another location now, and I don't know, I haven't spoke with him about what his goals are, but I would think maybe a little more lofty than the Main Street buyer. Some of the examples they have are car wash, dry cleaner, cafe, coffee shop, I would think falls in there, things like that. Maybe you're a corporate refugee, right? So still service businesses, but maybe with commercial clients or existing contracts, revenue, you're looking at, less like, I just want to like be in touch with the customers and really be a big part of the business, and more like, how I staff and volume and have contracts and regular income and all that stuff. So more of like 5 million-ish, low, a little bit more risk, using your corporate experience. So a lot of times these are people that have been in the industry in a corporation and now want to branch out and do it on their own, but they don't want to start something from scratch. Maybe they're in something that's more significant, so like a manufacturing, something like that. So there's some real value in getting into something that's already set up. Consulting, landscaping, advertising, things like that. Serial entrepreneurs. So now we're getting into like something that is, they're looking to turn a big profit, maybe to, turnover, something like that. So sound management in place, much bigger, up to $10 million, more risk, medium to high. This is somebody that maybe is building a portfolio of companies. So in a certain industry or market, they want the business to be separate. They're not going to come in and run it necessarily. Rental properties, computer services, something that makes sense with what they're already doing. I suppose if I decided to branch, and something I thought about, maybe I want to start a school, I want to run a spa, I want to run a supply business, maybe I'm then going to do something that's more expanded like that. And then financial buyers. So this is where we're talking about investment firms, things like that. When I worked in the aircraft industry, investment firm bought our company and was looking to make some changes, make it more profitable, turn it over for a profit rate. So something that's ready to grow rapidly. We're talking about 10 to 100 million. If you listened again to the podcast and listened to the dating ring, I think this is where they thought they were going to be, right? They were going to make this a $1 billion dating company. And they were getting, venture capitalists and angels to get involved. And then they end up realizing, that probably isn't what this company is going to be. It's going to be more of a corporate refugee Main Street buyer type of company. And for some people, that's like admitting defeat or failure. But healthcare, communications, energy, something tech, something like that. You want to hit growth hard. You're going to exit the industry, the business 5 to 7 years and make your money. We see a lot of companies like that, or hear about a lot of companies like that, when most companies and buyers aren't that way. Advantages: you can continue the success they've built on. Maybe you're finding a great location. I would say in my industry where there's a spa or nail salon on every corner, location could be a big reason why I would purchase an existing businesses. Employees and suppliers in place, equipment's already available, inventory is in place, things like that can be really beneficial. Trade credits established, it's turnkey, right? I don't have to spend 6 months to a year getting everything put together, especially in a supply chain issue situation now. It might be really beneficial to purchase an existing business versus waiting for all the equipment and things you would need. New owner can build on the experience of the previous owner. Easier to finance because it has a track record. That can be significant. Hopefully a value. Cash requirements, so it's going to cost you money. You're going to have money up front. You're probably not going to be able to bootstrap something like that. If the business is losing money, you really have to be confident that you can turn that corner and make it profitable. Paying for ill will. I mean, maybe the reason why this business is for sale is that they are not doing things well, and is that something that you can overcome? There might be employee issues, whether they want to stay around for a new owner or they were the right employees to begin with, and location could be an issue, a negative issue, right? There's a reason why that business isn't doing well, and it could be the location. Like I mentioned earlier, maybe inefficient equipment, facilities, obsolete inventory, like what we ran into, the challenge of implementing change, just doing that, building a culture, getting employees on board with that. Valuing the accounts receivable, the business just may be overpriced. So things to think about. There are stages in acquiring a business. We're not going to go through all of those, but identify and approach a candidate, sign a non-disclosure agreement, sign a letter of intent. Then you start looking at their information. You're going to sign that non-disclosure agreement, and that way you're going to say, I'm not going to tell everybody about what goes on in the inner workings of your business. So I can look a little bit closer and see if I'm interested. And then once you're kind of interested, then you sign that letter of intent, and then you start really going through things and seeing if it makes sense. Purchase agreement, close on the final deal, and begin the transition. So those are just the stages to know about if you're thinking about buying a business. There's one more slide on that. Lastly, we'll talk about franchising a business. So does it make sense to start a business from scratch when there's a franchise out there that's already built a model that works? Maybe not. Maybe franchising is for you. Maybe you're a little bit nervous about going into this on your own. Maybe that makes franchising for you. Industry, honestly, I can't think of anything you could go into that wouldn't probably have one or two franchises out there. So check it out. If nothing else, a lot of times you can get some information about your industry and your type of business that's available from franchise packets or information, like what they expect the startup to be, what they think are good locations. So even if you look at franchises in your industry and decide not to franchise, you might have gotten some good business information from it anyway, because they've done a lot of the research at a bigger scale than you could do. One thing to think about is it's considered a semi-independent business owner, right? So that may or may not appeal to you. You'll pay fees and royalties to a parent company, and then you'll have be able to use their trademark. Right now, I'm a Subway. I'm not just a sandwich shop. I can sell their products and services. Now I can, sell whatever it is that they're. So maybe I'm becoming a franchise. GM. I'm selling GM cars now. I'm getting that business format and that system generally in a normal franchise. You in a regular franchise, a general franchise, we'll look at the differences. You'll get like this fully integrated business operation, right? What you're going to purchase is the experience that they have in this industry. You're not going to have to figure it out all on your own. They should have an operating business model. So if you're getting into maybe a newer franchise, you really need to evaluate if they have established a working model, because that's what you're going to pay for, right? What is this franchise going to do for me that I can't do for myself? So a lot of times in the established ones, it's a name recognition, it's economies of scale, it's just a know-how that you couldn't come up with yourself. When you watch the franchising video, you'll see how 3 different people have approached it 3 different ways, right? One is passive income, one is like full scale significant franchisor with hundreds of locations and different established types of franchises, and then one that just buys into a model and owns I think he owns 5 at one point, and is more involved in the day-to-day. So I think gives you a really good, if you look at it in that way, 3 different ways to use franchising and how that may or may not work for you. The franchising relationship, we mentioned it's considered semi-independent, right? So it is you now, have some requirements and some rules on how you'll do things. So you as the franchisee on site selection, you can choose it, but your franchisor is going to want to know and have approval on that. They and you'll, some of those things sound bad, but you'll appreciate that, right? If you are a franchisee and someone else new wants to franchise and they're, maybe not making good choices, and you don't want that to reflect on your Subway if their Subway's a dump, right? Or whatever. So there's benefit to the franchisor having some restrictions and some say in what's going on, not only for you but for other franchisees that that maybe could detract from your accomplishments as a franchisee. So prototype and design, you pay for and implement on design. Employees, you do all that, hire, manage, fire, but they should probably have like a training system or something like that. Products and services, you can't sell whatever you want when you're a Subway, right? You can't just be like, I'm going to use regular bread and not the bread that they use. Probably not a good idea. Prices, I thought this was interesting. I guess they can recommend the price and set a maximum price, but you set the final prices. So since we're sticking with Subways now, when they had the $5 footlongs, we talked about some of the Subways in town didn't adhere to that, and I guess they don't have to. So I don't know if that's wise. Like, I feel like your customers probably would be kind of mad if Subway has a national campaign of $5 footlongs, and then you're like, but we don't do that. Probably need to figure out how you can stick with the benefit of the national advertising campaign versus, not. So they do develop and coordinate a national ad campaign, and then they may require that you do a certain amount of local advertising. You do pay a percentage for that national campaign, plus your local ads. Quality, they're going to set quality control, which you're going to appreciate as you have other franchisees that are also operating these businesses. Support, they should have a business system. You're going to have to do the day-to-day stuff. It's probably, if you're just going to have a couple, probably not possible to do it as an absentee owner. More likely if you had like a whole plethora of them and then maybe had someone run them for you. I don't know. I think sometimes people think the franchise will just run itself, and that's not really the case. You still have to operate the business. Trade name. This is where you purchase the right to use the franchisor's trade name without distributing particular products. So this is, I think, like True Value or Ace Hardware. I think those are trade name franchises. So you can sell whatever you want, but you get to use their name, which hopefully will bring you in business because they, know and trust True Value or Ace Hardware. Product distribution is where you can sell their products. So that's more like the car dealerships. So maybe I'm selling GM products, so I'm a product distribution franchise. And the Pure is more what we're thinking, like McDonald's, Subway, places like that where you get the full deal. Generally, in that case, you'll get the business system, startup and ongoing support, standardization of your goods and services. You'll have that national advertising program, which you'll pay for 1 to 5% of your sales. Sometimes there's financial assistance. I had a student one time that was a veteran, and he wanted to open a Little Caesars in the South, where he was from, and they had a great financing set up for veterans. So you might find some assistance, financial assistance. Hopefully a proven product, business format, centralized buying power, the economies of scale. Hopefully they've set up site selection and protect your territory so that you don't end up with 3 other Subways on the other corners that somebody else owns. And hopefully a greater chance of success with that proven model. Drawbacks, it can be expensive. It's not a cheap way to get into business. There's usually a franchise fee that on average runs like $25,000. It can be a lot more, a lot less, depending on what franchise you're getting into. Royalties, you pay this on the sales, which is the top line. So When you watch the franchise video, you'll see the guy that is franchising the Cold Stone kind of has an adversarial look at these royalties and paying this and feeling like he's not getting what it's worth. And then the guy in the middle that has all the franchises talks about, well, if you don't feel like you're getting what it's worth, then that's probably not, the way for you to get into business, right? He feels like that's well worth his franchise fee because, they're doing things he can't do. And he talks about Applebee's, he doesn't want to do the creative. They do all the menu revamp and the things like that. It wouldn't be cost effective for him to have a test kitchen to figure out what all of the new foods and beverages and things like that would be, but they can do that on a bigger scale, and he can pay just his percentage and get all of that for his places as well. So for him, he thought it was a great deal. So something to weigh, right? If you're not feeling like that franchise fee is going to be worth it, for the other guy, for Mr. Yang, he felt like, it helped the beginning and he appreciated having the name, but ongoing, there wasn't enough there for it to be worth it. Average royalty is on sales is 6.7. Again, that's the top line. If you read about Cold Stone later on, there was some controversy about whether you had to buy their products, right, their ice cream mixes or whatever, and there was some conflict between the franchisee and the franchisor of whether they were charging too much for that. So something to think about how that would work. The breakdown of the royalty fees, drawbacks. Now you have standard operating procedures. You have somebody to answer to. You're only using their approved suppliers. You are working a limited product line, things like that. Maybe you don't love their training program. Maybe the market's saturated. No independence, happy prisoners. Or if you're getting into entrepreneurship because you want to do whatever you want to do, this may not be for you. If you're not sure about getting into entrepreneurship, then this might work perfect for you. How many should you get? They talk about in the video as well. Onesies and twosies, the mom and pop look at it is a possibility and something you could do. But the guy Greg, that does all of them, a bigger percentage, he feels like that's really when you make money. So you have to figure out how that would work. 10 myths of franchising. The safest way to get into business. They never fail. That's not necessarily the case. You still have to work at it. Just like a regular business, you'd have to have your plan and make sure that you were picking the right business and doing the right thing. The bigger, the more successful. Not necessarily. It's not going to be less money. You're not going to be able to get into it for less money than they're saying. You're going to have to do what they say. You're not going to just be able to do like part of what they say and then do whatever you want the rest of the time. All franchises aren't the same. Research them just like you would any other business opportunity. You don't have to be a hands-on manager. You do. Like, this isn't going to run itself. Anyone can be satisfied, successful franchise owner, not necessarily. This has to be the way you want to get into business, the type of business for you. It's not the cheapest. The franchisor isn't going to run your business for you. They're going to give you what they're going to give you, but then you have to still run the business. You're not going to do it the way you want to again. So get out there and research them and see what's available, and see, if it makes sense for what you want to get into. I think of like a lot of the trends, right? Like the orange leaves and the peach waves and the cherry berries. Maybe you're too young to even remember this when frozen yogurt was a big thing. And so everybody went out and got a different franchise of those, and they all ended up failing. It was a trend and a fad, and it was expensive to pay that, and top line was seasonal, and so something that they're not indestructible, so you still have to research it just the way you would anything else. The right way to buy a franchise, research the market, same things. There's FDD, so there was a time when franchises were kind of the slick sale, used car sales situation. People were trying to sell you systems that probably didn't work. I looked into one for a while that was here in Wichita, Bath Junkie, that ended up being kind of that situation. There was a couple of of corporate owned ones that failed, but they were selling that business model to people as a successful business model. So definitely read through that, talk to people that are doing it already, ask tough questions. You'll need to go and visit them, things like that. Make sure it's really what you're getting, really what you think you are. I would say that franchise businesses are litigious as well. There's usually some disgruntled franchisees, so that shouldn't be like the only determining factor. Get in there and really research it and decide how that might work. So a few ways to get into business. If you're still researching, trying to figure out what you want to do, check out franchises, see if there's something available for sale that might make sense. Think about how you want to set up your business regardless in terms of forms of ownership. And then we're on our way to getting open. Let me know if you have any questions. Thank you.